Welcome to today's Explainer. Have you ever actually stopped to think about our planet not just as a giant rock floating in space, but as a massive, beautifully interconnected machine? It's true, Earth has its very own, perfectly designed, built-in thermostat. And today, for our 8th grade lesson, we're going to explore exactly how it works. We are talking about ocean currents, the massive, hidden engines running just beneath the waves.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty science of it all, let's ground ourselves in a truth from Scripture. Psalm 107 verse 29 says, "He made this storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed." As godly learners, we always want to remember the grand designer behind these massive oceanic engines. The sheer power of the oceans is absolutely awe-inspiring, right? But it's entirely in the hands of the Creator who designed them to perfectly sustain life on our incredible planet.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with Earth's giant climate engine, move on to surface currents and wind, plunge into deep currents and heavy water, check out the global conveyor belt, and finally, tie it all together with morality, education, and peace.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, Earth's giant climate engine. Now, when you look at a world map, the ocean kind of just looks like one big still puddle of blue water. But that literally couldn't be further from the truth. Ocean currents are actually powerful rivers flowing right through the middle of the sea. Imagine a rushing, flowing river like the Mississippi or the Amazon, but completely submerged underwater, twisting and turning all across the globe. These underwater rivers are super busy too. They're responsible for moving heat, vital nutrients for marine life, and even entire storm systems around the world. So why does this matter to you and me? Why should an 8th grader care about some underwater rivers? Well, because these currents regulate our entire global climate. Knowing exactly where they flow helps us predict natural events like droughts, floods, and major storms. Plus, they're completely essential for global trade and the survival of marine life. But most importantly for us, understanding how this incredible system works makes us informed, prepared, and responsible stewards of God's creation.
Moving right along to Section 2, surface currents and wind. When we talk about surface currents, we're really focusing on the water moving within the top 400 meters of the ocean. Think of this 400-meter zone as the outermost layer of our climate engine. It's the part of the ocean that interacts directly with the sky above it.
So what's actually pushing all that top layer water around? Well, the drivers of surface currents are primarily global winds and the Earth's rotation. Imagine wind and the spinning of our planet acting like invisible hands, just constantly pushing and sweeping these top-layer waters all across the globe. Let's look at a real-world example of this, the Gulf Stream. This is a massive, incredibly powerful surface current that scoops up warm water from the Gulf of Mexico and carries it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. And this brilliantly illustrates our point, because the Gulf Stream literally acts like a giant heater. It keeps Western Europe significantly warmer than other places on Earth that sit at the exact same latitude. If we didn't have it, countries like the UK would be absolutely freezing.
All right, time to go deeper. Section 3, deep currents and heavy water. Leaving the surface wind behind us, let's plunge into the dark, mysterious, deep ocean. Let's contrast these two forces directly so we don't get them confused. On the surface, the water is driven by wind and the Earth spinning. But way down in the deep ocean, the wind can't reach that far. Instead, deep ocean currents are driven entirely by water density, and that density is determined by two major things, temperature and salinity, which is just a fancy science term for salt content.
Down in the dark, density completely rules the deep. It turns out cold water is heavier than warm water, and salty water is heavier than fresh water. So when water gets freezing cold and highly salty, like it does near the ice caps, it becomes incredibly dense. It gets so heavy that it literally plunges downward to the very bottom of the sea, while the warmer, less salty water rises right up to take its place. Which brings us to Section 4, the global conveyor belt. When you put the surface and deep currents together, they create what scientists call thermohaline circulation. I know, huge word, but it's absolutely crucial for our homework. Let's just break it down. Thermo means temperature, and haline means salt. So this is a massive global circulation system driven entirely by heat and salt. Let's move to and see how this builds into a continuous cycle. Step 1, salty freezing water sinks at the poles. Step 2, that super heavy water hits the ocean floor and flows deep underwater toward the equator. Step 3, As it moves away, it creates a void, which physically pulls warm surface water from the tropics back up toward the poles to replace it. It's a massive, continuous loop that balances the extreme temperatures of our planet. Okay, get ready for a fact that is absolutely going to blow your mind, because the ocean is so incredibly vast. If you were to track just a single drop of water on this global conveyor belt, it would take hundreds of years for that one drop to complete a single cycle. Hundreds of years. That just goes to show the sheer scale of the engine we're talking about here. When you step back, this beautiful, intricate system is essentially God's thermostat. Without these balancing currents constantly churning, distributing heat from the equator and cold from the poles, parts of the Earth would be completely uninhabitable. I mean, we'd have freezing cold in some places and scorching hot in others. It really is a perfect, life-saving design. And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, Morality, Education, and Peace. Just like we marvel at the incredible physical balance of the Earth's oceans, there's a really profound lesson here about the spiritual balance of our own minds. At Heroes Smart Academy, we purposely intertwine biblical morality with your education for one very specific reason. Education without morality will hurt. What is the point of knowing all about thermohaline circulation if you make choices that end up hurting yourself and others? Just as the ocean needs both heat and salt to function properly, your mind needs both knowledge and moral character. The Bible tells us in Romans chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, that a mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. Tying your biblical morality to your education brings true peace of mind. It acts as an anchor for all this amazing knowledge you're gathering. When you combine what you learn in science with the spiritual, moral foundation, you don't just become smart, you become wise. All right, before we wrap up today, let's quickly run through your homework. Make sure you can easily explain what causes surface currents and how temperature and salinity drive the deep currents. Don't forget why the Gulf Stream is so important. You're also going to need to draw and label a diagram of both systems. And finally, summarize how they work together as Earth's climate engine. So I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. You've seen today just how perfectly orchestrated the oceans are, and you've seen how absolutely vital it is to pair that scientific knowledge with spiritual wisdom. So the big question is, how will you use your education to be a better steward of God's climate engine? Think about the choices you make every single day and how you can use what you've learned to protect and honor this incredible planet we've been given. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.